Welcome, everyone. Thank you for joining our Lunch and Learn today. My name is Deborah Olashansky, and I serve as the Jewish Community Relations Director for the Jewish Federation of Nashville. We are honored today to have our guest from CUFI. With that, I will introduce our JCRC Chair, Stephen Reamer, who will introduce our guests. Thank you for joining us. Stephen, you just need to unmute, please.
I appreciate that. Let me again introduce Bob Scott, who works as a field coordinator and a national speaker for Christians United for Israel. His work is to educate on the importance of standing with Israel as a biblical and historical perspective, as well as from a modern day geopolitical standpoint in his region, which includes not only Tennessee, but Alabama, Mississippi, North Carolina, Illinois, and Iowa. Christians United for Israel has over 10 million members working to defend the nation of Israel, to ensure the United States continues to hold Israel as one of its greatest allies, and to fight against anti-Semitism in our communities, churches, college campuses, the media, and on Capitol Hill. And on a personal note, I want to let you know that Bob is not just another pretty face. I'm familiar with CUFI. They've got a website that you can investigate, and I value his friendship and the value of the work that he's doing on behalf of the Jewish people. Bob?
Thank you so much, Stephen. I hope everyone can hear me. I know this is being recorded, and that's wonderful, be able to get the word out. And was able to enjoy a wonderful time. Goodness, now a couple of months ago, I guess, with Stephen up in Nashville. So very excited to be able to be a part of this. And just to let everyone know, if you have any questions, I'm willing to answer any questions that you have. When Deborah and I were talking and deciding what we wanted to do, what I want to do is be able to share with you guys today our messaging. CUFI was begun back in 2006. And as a result of several things that were going on in Israel, some of the agreements and funding and things that we needed to do as a nation, it was begun back in 2006 with 400 leaders in a room, and has now grown to over 10 million members. And we have both Jewish members and Christian members of Christians United for Israel, and are really working hard to be able to advance the cause. And we are the organization, we describe ourselves sometimes as Christian Zionists, that we do believe that Israel has not only a right to exist, but a right to the eternal homeland. And we make sure that our nation continues to stand with who is our strongest ally in the region, the only democratic state in that area. And as Stephen mentioned, we do a lot of speaking. I do a lot of speaking to churches. I do a lot of speaking to pastors. We speak to congressmen and in the both in the state level and in the national level. And I was actually in Mississippi a week ago, Monday and Tuesday, speaking to a couple of different groups of pastors. I was in the Quad Cities of Iowa, Illinois this last weekend, and was able to speak and share at a night to honor Israel, and was able to have actually a wonderful Shabbat dinner with the with Alan Ross, the local head of the Jewish Federation of the Quad Cities, just a wonderful man. And was able to share with him. We were able to deal with some state legislation we're wanting to do in Iowa, and was able to be in a little town called Mahomet, which is an odd sounding town, Mahomet, Illinois, and was able to speak to other pastors and to just be able to get the word out. So what we thought is it would be good for me to take maybe 20, 25 minutes of this. This is an hour-long presentation that I'm going to condense. So we're going to move through, but I wanted you to see what I share with people whenever we share. We come to them from a biblical and historical approach, but we also touch a little bit on the geopolitical realities, the history of the region. And we also spend some time in our presentation. We won't do a whole lot of it today, but talk about modern day Israel. When we take pastors and leaders to Israel, it is as much modern day geopolitical realities as it is biblical and historical. So we combine all of them together. So if it's okay, what I'm going to do is I'm going to share our screen. And as we all know from Zooms, this usually works well and sometimes does not. So we're going to give this a shot, and I'm going to share my screen here and bring up a presentation. And I'm basically just going to give you the presentation as we would to any group. And if you have any questions, just because the nature of this, it's probably easy to either write them in the chat so you don't forget them, or write them down on a piece of paper. And I'll answer any question you have after this presentation. And my answer, I'm also not afraid to say, I don't know, but we'll get back to you. If there's something at all that maybe I don't know the answer to, I'll get back to you and we'll be good. Is that okay? If we're all ready for that, I'm going to do share screen, and I'm going to bring up hopefully the correct screen. And we are going to play. And can everybody see that? I need a thumbs up maybe or something. Okay, it should say why Israel. And I can already see that some of it is kind of going off the screen. So there may be some of it that that may be behind our pictures there. But as you know, this is where I usually introduce who we are. That Christians United for Israel, CUFI, is a grassroots organization that has grown to over 10 million members. Stephen mentioned this, I believe. If you're wanting to find out more about CUFI, it's underneath our pictures there on the right, but it's www.cufi for Christians United for Israel.org. So we don't hide anything about who we are. We let everyone know that we are a nonpartisan organization. We'll work with whoever wants to work with the nation of Israel, and we will also respond to whoever is not supporting the nation of Israel, regardless of political party or standing. We will do that. We are a non-conversionary organization. We are simply here to be able to be a people that stands with the nation of Israel and make sure that our nation continues to do that. So I usually share at this point, I was able to take a trip to the Holy Land. I've been to Israel 3 times. I'm not sure how many some of you guys have been there, but I've been to Israel 3 times. The first time was simply a pilgrimage trip. It was just to experience the land. And as you know, if you've been there, it's transforming. It really is. And to be able to go and to be able to see the land of the Bible, one of our friends there, Zev Orenstein from the City of David project that they have there, always likes to say, when you're in the land of Israel, it's not just a matter of faith, but it's a matter of fact. And that's what you learn when you're there. And then I was able to go back in 2010 and I actually went with AIPAC on a governmental trip. And that's what began to connect both the biblical, historical Israel with modern day Israel and the geopolitical approach. And then was able to go back with CUFI in 2018, and it began my process here. When we're talking to people, we start, because we are a Christians United for Israel, and we're talking to a lot of churches, talking to a lot of pastors, we always want to start with the scriptures. And so again, some of that may be off on your screen, but we start with Genesis 12:3. I will bless those that bless you, and I will curse those who curse you. And in you, all the families of the earth shall be blessed. We usually take a few moments and talk about some of the blessings the earth has from the nation of Israel, even from a modern standpoint, the iPhone, medicines, first responders, those kind of things that happen from the nation of Israel. And then we'll spend a moment. And again, we're not trying to give a study of the Hebrew language or even in the New Testament, the Greek language or anything, but I do kind of share this, and we found it to be important. I will bless those who bless you, and I will curse him who curses you. And a more proper understanding, maybe a very simplified version, I will curse those who esteem you lightly. It is not just those that come against Israel with the hammer, with the sword, but those that would conspire, those that would deal shrewdly with the Jewish people. God comes against them. And so we usually take them through that. We let everyone know that through the Via Sheamda, we talk about the prayer that's prayed and the importance of not just one generation, but every generation has been there to wipe out the Jewish people. This is nothing new that is happening now. It is nothing because the Jewish people have done something with settlements, which are not really settlements. You all know this, but that of course Israel's not an occupying force. They're not the apartheid state. All that, it has nothing to do with that. But every generation they have attempted to wipe out the Jewish people. There have been people to come against them. We take them to Genesis 13 and speak about the covenant that God made with Abram. And the covenant, just very shortly, is about a piece of property that God promised a specific group of people. Look, from the north, the south, the east, and the west, and all the land that you see, I give you and your offspring forever. The forever is important. We are living in modern times, but biblical times. We are seeing the fulfillment of the promise that God made to the Jewish people about the land, a piece of property that he promised to give a specific group of people, and it will be their land forever, regardless of what the United Nations says or does not say, regardless of what anybody would teach anywhere else. That land is their land forever. And how that happened, we begin to move into Abram believing the Lord, and he credited him from righteousness in chapter 15, verse 6. And then in chapter 15, verse 8, I always find it kind of humorous that Abram's belief is a lot like mine, that I believe, but help my unbelief. 2 verses later, how can I know? The Bible says that he believed and God said, you're righteous. And then how can I know? How can I know they'll gain possession of it? And of course, God establishes his covenant with Abram and with his descendants afterwards. And at this point, we actually bring in a New Testament scripture in Hebrews. It said God made his promise to Abraham, and since there was no one greater for him to swear by, he swore by himself. That by God's very name, he gave the promise. So it's a people, a property, and a promise, all tied to the person of God, to the name of God. And so we begin to take them, because it's a little bit more than just me making a promise. This is God himself making a promise. And so as we begin to take them through that, we go to, of course, the life of Sarah, and she's going to have a son named Isaac. It is a covenant not just with it's not a covenant with Ishmael, even though God said he will bless that people as well, but it is a covenant that he established with the land of Israel to his son Isaac, and he will establish his covenant with him and again, it's behind the pictures on my screen, as an everlasting covenant. Again, we see the forever, and not just for him, but for his descendants after him. So we move from there to begin to talk about, again, the idea of the Via Sheamda, that in every generation, we take them to Exodus chapter 1, the story of the new king, the new Pharaoh that arose that did not know Joseph. And he said, the children of Israel are more and mightier than we. And I don't know what translation, what version of the scriptures we're using here, but he said, come, let us deal shrewdly with them. And of course, I will take them back to Genesis 12:3. It's not just those that come at them with a hammer, come at them with a sword, but those that would attempt to conspire against the people of Israel. And then this is a wonderful place that we can kind of take the people that we're talking to, because the Bible actually mentions Shiphrah and Puah, two of the midwives that protected Moses and the Hebrew baby boys, and you know the story very well. And the wonderful part of that is that God always uses people. We begin to take them now from not only just a God mandate and a biblical mandate in general, but we begin to take them through the process of how God will use individuals to be able to do the work. It's the importance of us going to Washington, D.C. every summer. It's the importance of us speaking out on college campuses, in churches if we need to fight odd theology that would somehow say that the church has replaced Israel or something, which is incorrect. And so we stand against them, and God uses people. He constantly works through people. You see that throughout the scriptures. And so it allows us to be able to set that stage. So as we're taking them through that, we talk about, we take them from there to 587 BC. And again, some say 586 BC, but we take them to the destruction of the first temple by the Babylonians. We begin to take them through the exile, and of course, and some of these pictures are kind of odd. I can go ahead and tell you that, but that's okay. We take them through the exile, and as it was prophesied and by Jeremiah. And of course, it was also prophesied that 70 years later they would come back. We see that in the books of Ezra and Nehemiah. So we take them through that. And we also, it leads us into the story of Esther and Mordecai and the 9 million Jews that remained in Persia. And this was the first attempted genocide of the Jewish people. Not just the Hebrew baby boys, but every Jewish person in the nation of, in the land of Persia were going to be killed. Again, this is another place where we talk about Esther and Mordecai. For such a time as this, you know the verse as well. God always uses people. And at the risk of their own life, Esther stands before the king. You know the story. So we begin to talk about that and the land being, the people being scattered. We actually then take them through what we would consider New Testament times, but we take them to 70 AD, the destruction of the Second Temple by the Romans. That the Jewish people had revolted many times, but then revolted, and the Romans come. And I think it was the historian Josephus that writes about maybe 1 million Jews were killed in the streets during this time. And so after this time, it leads us to the expulsion of the Jewish people from the land, even though there's always been Jewish people in the land of Israel. Everybody didn't leave. There were always people that were there, but the expulsion throughout the Middle East, the expulsion to Europe. And so we begin to talk about that, which also leads us into and helps us a little bit later when we learn about Israel becoming a nation and what was really happening to the Jewish people around the world. So we take them to there. And the fascinating thing is, you know this, that for 2,000 years, the Jewish people were able to keep their customs. They were able to keep their worship. They were able to keep, you know, the history of the land. It's just a fascinating thing. And you know that from just a historical mandate. So from there, we read Psalm 83. And again, the prayer that God don't stay silent, and how the nations again are attempting to destroy them so that Israel's name is remembered no more. It's a people, a property, and a promise, all tied to the name of God. And here, when we have a little bit of time, we talk about the name being changed in 135 AD to the, and again, depending on who you talk to, either Philistia or Palestina or something. It's where the name Palestine comes from. That's not a historical name. That's not an ethnic group of people. But the attempt was to destroy the name of Israel so that their name was remembered no more. We also share a little bit, and we do a little bit more later, about the nation of Jordan. You know, all the talk of Israel being the occupying force. Well, it was the nation of Jordan that occupied biblical Judea and Samaria and renamed it to the West Bank. And so that ties in so that their name would be remembered no more. So we move from here and begin to talk about our history. I apologize, that was my phone. We begin to talk about our history, meaning the Christians' history with the Jewish people. And most Christians don't know our own history. And they don't understand why hi, we're here to help doesn't quite carry the same weight in the Jewish community. And while it's, and why would it be pushed off? And the reason are things that I'm going to run through very quickly, if it's okay, and if you have any questions, but we spend a little more time. Of course, the rise of the Crusades that were to liberate, of course, the Holy Land from the Muslims, but how there was a secondary target. We talk about the 12,000 Jews that were killed in the Rhine Valley alone, how They would place Jewish people in buildings, and literally the hatred of singing "Christ we adore thee" while buildings are being borne down. And that's our history with the Jewish people, and that's Christians' history. And then we talk about the Spanish Inquisitions, 1492. And sometimes when we have time, we'll read from Columbus's own journal that talks about how, as he was leading and going on the expedition to the New World, in his own journal, he writes about this was the same time of the expulsion of the Jewish people from Spain, that if they did not leave, they were going to be killed. And again, we moved from there to maybe what would be considered maybe a Catholic background to even the Protestant background, and talk a little bit about Martin Luther and how he wrote on the Jews and their lies, 65,000 word treatise that would talk about calling for the burning of synagogues and the selling of Jewish children into slavery. And he literally says that he's going to do this in honor of our Lord and of Christendom. And I'll be honest with you, most Jewish people probably know this as the history as the history of those that were against him. Most Christian people don't know this history. And so we take time to let them know this is why we've got to correct some things. This is why we've got to be able to move forward. And so we talk about that a little bit. We move a little bit to the pogroms. Again, we begin to talk about all of what is quote unquote Christianity's history with the Jewish people. And of course, from there, we move to the Holocaust and the final solution. One of the things that we share here, and I didn't go into it, and I won't go too far into it, but the words of Martin Luther, who is the father of the Protestant movement in Christianity, the words of Martin Luther were often used by Hitler in his speeches. That his words are quoted in Mein Kampf. And so it allows us to be able to show how the usurpation, the people who have said they knew Christ have not really done what they're supposed to do in relationship with the Jewish people and our brothers and sisters who are Jewish. And so we talk a little bit about that and about the indifference of the American church. We basically remained silent until we were forced to get into World War II. The church in Europe was Nazified. And so it was a lot because of the words of Martin Luther that were often quoted by Adolf Hitler. And we own that. And we own that this is a problem. And this is something that is part of our history. And we need to be able to correct that. So we talk a little bit about this. I usually give a quote from Adolf Hitler: "If I'm ever really in power, destruction of the Jews will be my first and most important job." We do this and begin to give some speeches. And the reason is we'll make a comment, and it's not meant to sound cute, but I'll usually make a comment. If someone tells you they're going to kill you, believe them. And it's part of a video that I did not show, that if you want to see, I can show a couple minute videos, but just the nature of Zoom, the videos sometimes don't seem to work well. But it was from Holocaust survivor Irving Roth, who passed away earlier this year, and we pray his memory is a blessing to all. But he starts out a video, and his first words are, "It all begins with words," and how people talking against the Jewish people is where it began. He talks about them saying the Jews are our misfortune that begin to move forward them. And anytime you alienate a people group, it allows you to be able to move to the furthest degree, which is even killing or attacks against them. And so we talk about the 6 million Jewish people murdered in the Holocaust, some 1.5 million. I know some statistics would say the number of children may be even higher, but that's kind of a conservative number that it's well understood. I also, at this time, will quote some words from Irving Roth, which are in every situation, in every altercation, there's the perpetrators and there's the victims, but there's also two other types of people. There are the interveners and the bystanders. And the only thing that separates the bystanders from the interveners is action. And we're able to share with them one of the things that we say that sometimes can seem like a cliche, but it's not. We truly say never again, that we're never going to allow this to happen. We're never going to stand on the sidelines again. We're not going to be the perpetrators of the violence. CUFI is definitely not going to do that, but we're not going to be just the ones that stand on the sideline as bystanders. We are people who will do what we need to do and fight the battles that we need to fight to make sure that our nation continues to stand with the Jewish people. So we're not interested in just waving another flag. We're not interested in just another trip, but we truly are working, and we let the world know. And our job is also to let the church know that God is still the God of Israel. So we begin to work through that. Then we begin to move to some modern day things. And again, you know this, so we'll go through fairly quickly, but Isaiah 66, can a country be born in a day or a nation be brought forth in a moment? It's a great opportunity to talk to them about May 13th, 1948, no nation of Israel, but May 14th, 1948, the nation of Israel was born. We're able to share a little bit here about the UN Resolution 181, which not only gave a nation state to the rebirth of the nation of Israel, but also gave a 22nd state, Arab state, to the people that were the Transjordan Arabs at the time, the ones today that use the term Palestinians. But they rejected it, and you know the history. The Arab nations come against the nation of Israel. And this is, again, sometimes we can delve depending on where we are. We give the information, but sometimes you can kind of camp on something a little bit longer. But if we camp a little longer here, we talk a little bit about the today, of the Palestinian refugees and UNRWA from the United Nations and all the stuff that goes with that. And we talk a little bit about the 800,000 Palestinians, the Transjordan Arabs, that were displaced during this time, but they were displaced because of the war that they started. History would actually even say, they said, okay, leave your areas, and when we defeat the new nation of Israel, you come back to your homes and reclaim, but they were never able to do that because the Jewish people won, the nation of Israel won. And what is not known is that in the Arab nations that surrounded Israel, where all the Jewish people had went for a couple of millennia, that they had established homes and communities and owned businesses and went to school, were part of the Arab nations. But there were actually the same number, 800,000 to some 850 Jewish people that were displaced from their homes in the Arab nations. And if they didn't leave, they were killed. And most of them didn't become refugees. They fled to the new nation of Israel. And we talk a little bit about the Palestinian people, the Transjordan Arabs, not being allowed citizenship in the nations where they were sent, but that Israel opened up and allowed for there to be full citizenship for the Arabs that were in their land. Again, some things that maybe aren't quite taught in history books, and we camp there a little bit, and it just shows the difference of the nation of Israel from the other people around. It's where we're able to take, when we talk to church groups, to talk about, in that day, the Lord will reach out his hand a second time to reclaim the surviving remnant. We take them to Amos, that he is going to rebuild the ruined cities. They'll plant vineyards and drink the wine. They will plant Israel in their own land. And again, some of it's maybe cut off by our pictures, but it says, and never again to be uprooted. That this is at some point in our speeches, it's really easy to say it's 1939 again and try to come up with this kind of thing. And the reality is there are people that hate the nation of Israel, and they always have. But this is different, because the nation of Israel is not going to be uprooted again. This is not going to happen again. And thank God we have people like CUFI and other organizations that are going to stand with the nation of Israel. And so we talk about that eternal promise. It allows us to be able to go and talk about some land that was in the area, and just to be able to fulfill the promise that God said in Amos, the valley of Megiddo, and this is what the land looks like today. We take them to Ezekiel chapter 36, the land desolate will be cultivated. And I love this. They'll say the land that was laid waste will become like the Garden of Eden. We take them to the Hula Valley and talk about the marsh infected, mosquito infected land that was there. And then we're able to show them this picture today. And it's not just because people worked hard. It really is because God said the land that lay desolate will become like the Garden of Eden. That when the rightful owners, think about it, the land that flowed with milk and honey would be desolate until the rightful owners stepped into the land and were able to cultivate it and fulfill the promise of God. And we also talk a little bit about in 1909, because that helps us establish the 66 Jewish families coming into the Jaffa area and buying the land. It helps us to establish that everything didn't re-begin in 1948, that there's always been Jewish people that considered this their home, because it was their home. And they went and they bought lands. And you know that the way that land transfers is either by warfare to be able to do that, or by purchase of land. And they purchase land. And we love this because most people who have a biblical idea of Israel but don't understand the modern day Israel, they don't understand. I think maybe last year Israel had become, were they seventh maybe of the most innovative country of the world, but we know that they're a startup nation that's far above anything else that's out there. And so we talk about that a little bit. The land refused to live again until the rightful owners stepped on to the land, and what's happened just in 70 plus years. It's absolutely incredible. Absolutely incredible. So from here, we actually talked then a little bit about the 6-Day War, take them through from June 5th, 1967, and we take them to June 10th at the end of 6 days, about the Jewish people tripling their land mass, and how all the lands that are there in the lines there, they gave back. Land returned 97% of the land that they took, but at this point they said, we're not separating, we're not dividing Jerusalem again. I think there were some in 1948, May 14th, 1948. I believe my number's right. There were some 1,600 Jews living in East Jerusalem. 14 days later, after that war, there were 0. But again, that all changed during the 6-Day War.
Mr. Scott, I'm so sorry to interrupt, but I want to make sure we leave enough time for questions. So can I ask you to maybe wrap the presentation in the next minute or two, and then we'll turn to questions?
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yes, it's fine. I'm just going to take you there. We go through there, and I'm going to do it online here so I can see if there's anything I missed. But we take from there. We talk a little bit about their fight for peace, and I'll have to wait a second until this thing gets through just loading to be able to go to the next. And one thing that's not in here was what happened in this earlier this year in May. We talk a little bit about Hamas. We talk about the modern geopolitical area there, the Palestinian Authority, Hezbollah, which is really Iran. We talk about Iran there. And then from here, we actually move into a few New Testament scriptures just to let we talk about just some headlines from the news a little bit about anti-Semitism going on. We spend just a moment about something that people do not know about, BDS. And so we talk a little bit about that. Then we actually move into a few New Testament scriptures. We talk about how Paul says that God has not rejected his people. Jesus would tell them salvation is of the Jews. And we have shared in the spiritual blessings, it says in the book of Romans, we owe it to the Jews to share with them the material blessings. And it's not just money, but that we do what we do. And so the book of the Bible says to pray for the peace of Jerusalem. We believe that prayer is important, but it is only the beginning. We take them through Nehemiah, what he did. He prayed, then he petitioned the king, and then he got up and rebuilt the land. This is where we take them to the Israel pledge card that we have everybody sign to be a part. We speak just very briefly, and this is what we do. We have Kufi on campus. We train students to be able to fight against anti-Semitism on campus. We actually pay for about 650 students to come to Washington, D.C. every year and train them. We will actually take about 70 of them to Israel and share with them what's really going on. We have an Israel course. It's a 20 course lesson to be able to teach basically what I've done here in 25 minutes and to be able to take them through 20 weeks of that and a study. We invite people to the Washington Summit. And then we actually do spend just a moment on what Esther and Mordecai did. Bad legislation was brought to the king. So Esther and Mordecai brought good legislation to let the Jewish people defend themselves, to let the Jewish people do what they need to do. That's what we do. And then we'll kind of end with this slide and let them be able to do a QR code to join if they need it. So that's what I've got. I'm going to stop sharing my screen. If I can get to the top, I don't know how to get to it, but there you go. Somewhere, maybe I won't. I can't find my mouse. so there you go. We're going to do that. Oh, there you go. That was for Israel. Okay. There you go. That's the presentation. I know that was a fire hose, but that's just who we are and what we do.
Well, Bob, I appreciate it. You know, that was a very compelling presentation on why Christians should support CUFI. Why should Jews support CUFI?
That is a great question. And there's a lot of organizations that the Jewish people can get behind. I would say this, that it has nothing to do with Jews or Gentiles. It has to do with effectiveness. My response would be, again, we're teaching a lot of people in churches and other places things that they don't know. And I wanted to share that with you so you could know who we were. We have been able to grow to over 10 million members, not because we're a paper pushing organization, but because we are people of action. The reason that both Jews and Gentiles and everyone that can get behind what we're doing is every year we go to Washington, D.C. You know, of course, obviously we weren't able to this last little bit, but every year we have legislation that we put forth. One of the first main ones that we were able to put forth a few years ago, I believe in 2018, was the Taylor Force Act, which that we were instrumental in putting this out. Nobody else wanted to touch it. Our thought is we may lose, but we're going to fight the battle. And so we fought the battle and we're able to get the Taylor Force Act. And for those that may not know, that may be watching on YouTube later, the Taylor Force Act was the act that stopped funding to go to the Palestinian people, Palestinian Authority, because of their pay to slay program. Taylor Force was a young man who was killed in streets of Tel Aviv, I believe. And we found out that the Palestinian Authority paid as a pay for slave program. They would pay the families or the people who had committed the atrocities against Jewish people. And we found out that it was roughly the same amount of number in their budget that went for this program to pay terrorists to attack Jewish people as it was the amount that the United States was sending to the Palestinian Authority for funding. So we said dollar for dollar, every dollar that's paid out for terrorists, we are not going to give you that funding. And we were able to put that together. We worked with Senator Ted Cruz on the Human Shield legislation that actually is being brought up and some of the things that were happening in Gaza. So we've worked with people on both sides of the aisle to be able to advance legislation. So that would be my answer. It is that we have become greater than just an education program for the Christian community. We are truly not just players on the hill, but we are truly people who are seen as people of action. And so that would be why I would say that you can support what we do, no matter who you are. It's a good question, though. Thank you, Steve. That's because that helps me to know how I'm communicating. I appreciate that. Are there any questions or comments or any?
Just a quick point of information that might be useful for you. Taylor Force was actually a Vanderbilt student, and it was actually a member of our community whose trip he was on. So many of us are quite familiar with that story, and also we're very supportive of making those legislative changes.
His father was a speaker at I think probably the last summit we had in DC, which is in 2019. His father came and spoke to the people. Very powerful time. So thank you. Any other questions?
I think we're a small enough group. If anyone has questions, who would like to unmute and ask yourselves, otherwise I'll jump in, but if anyone on the call has a question they'd like to offer first.
And I realize I wanted to give you that to show you what we do. So I realize I might not have answered every question that you have. So feel free, throw them at me.
All right, I'll kick it off, and maybe others will have more. So I noticed you mentioned your CUFI on campus, and I'm curious if you are coordinating with other groups on campus, specifically Hillels on campus, in any of those efforts.
I am trying. I've actually attempted, and I'm sorry, but the one at Vanderbilt, I've had a couple email exchanges early on. Matter of fact, right after I was able to talk to Stephen, they put me in touch with him, and we had a couple of email conversations early on just to be able to build relationships. I'm new to the region. I mean, I live in Tennessee, but I'm new to that. But I'm trying to look at the whole region. So right now it's building relationships, those kind of things. And I know that the CUFI on campus, when they have been able to do events, it's been a couple of years and things have been shifting, with everything with COVID, but they have been able to do some joint across the nation, been able to do joint events, brought in people like Irving Roth, brought in some other people. And they always worked hard to make it a combination of both maybe a CUFI chapter, which maybe had more Christian students than Jewish, and to try to work with the Jewish organizations that were on campus. That's not just something that kind of happens. It is something that we look to try to initiate and make happen, or again, not in a forceful way, but we're looking to be very proactive and intentional about working with the other organizations. And because they know, the Jewish students know what they deal with. They know what needs to be done. They know the messaging that would work best. And so we're very intentional about attempting to do that. Thank you so much. That helps me to know that that's the right track. I know that it is, but that helps. Thank you.
So that sort of feeds into a follow-up, which is, clearly your work is very pro-Israel. You are working very hard to engage people to be pro-Israel. Is there also a component that is fighting against anti-Semitism in general in that effort? And how do those overlap? How does the pro-Israel and anti-Semitism overlap?
I gotcha. Well, I mean, there's also another component, because you have to say, well, you're for Israel, you must be against a Palestinian people or Arabs, and that couldn't be further from the truth. If you're on the land, a strong Israel is what is needed for that whole area. So pro-Israel works a lot of educating on, this is about the land, this is about a promise that God made to the land, and then also dealing with Congress to make sure that our nation continues to support the nation of Israel. They're not mutually exclusive. I mean, sometimes you have just words, again, but it all begins with words. If it's allowed to just be, someone's allowed to be anti-Semitic, there's always crazy people, and you can't fight against every crazy person. But when the crazy and the hate-filled speech begins to reach levels of importance, that's when they almost come together. And so our work is political in nature, because we do a lot of stuff in Washington, D.C. We do a lot of things in state legislation. And our state legislation are things such as anti-BDS, which is not only for the nation of Israel, but it is also to fight the anti-Semitic problem of BDS, because there's no other nation that's mentioned in BDS. It's only Israel. They don't mention China. They don't mention Syria, or you know the list. And so it's more than just trying to fight some sort of injustice. It's anti-Semitic. We try to work and do some things with proper IRA definitions to make sure that anti-Semitism is defined properly, so that you know it when you see it. The campus team works very closely with the anti-Semitism aspect of it, because while college students are important, they matter. We need their life. I mean, I'm 51 years old, and so I need somebody younger than me that's helping to push me along and let me know. But they might not be able to do as much on the pro-Israel part, but they are combating anti-Semitism every single day. So with campus, we teach them, here's how you respond when you hear a professor say something that's vile. Here's how you respond when you come against organizations that are protesting or doing whatever. Here's your answers in conversations over coffee. And so they're not really mutually exclusive. We see any of the, it's not just, okay, I disagree with something that the nation of Israel, the government is doing. That may not be anti-Semitic. But you can begin to see some patterns, and you begin to see some of the same people fighting constantly. And whenever the question against Israel is really an accusation against Israel, and you know the difference when you begin to hear, then okay, I have to be pro-Israel to say this is why, but I also have to fight the root core of whatever that is, which is the anti-Semitism that lies. And so I don't know if that answers your question, but we don't see them as mutually exclusive, and we don't find an anti-Semitic boogeyman behind everything, but we begin to see that's the core of everything that's standing against the nation of Israel, because there's not many other reasons to do so with all that they do that's good.
So that sort of answers it. I guess I'll push it just a little bit farther.
Yeah.
I'm sure you're aware that there are some in the Jewish community uncomfortable with some of this because of the Christian theology they believe is behind Christian support of Israel. So I'll just ask it bluntly. As you work with pastors to encourage them to be supportive of Israel, is there also any sort of a conversation about the promotion of the concept of Jews as Christ killers, which many of our young people in this state, locally and across the state, when we talk to young people about anti-Semitism, that's the majority of what they're feeling is their friends are being taught that these Jewish kids are going to hell. And I just wonder if there's a piece of that. They killed
Christ.
Right, and that they killed Christ, they're going to hell. And I just wonder, in your work with pastors, as you're supporting Israel, is there any room for some of those conversations as well?
Yeah, and again, our conversation before, I kind of thought maybe that's where you were going with it as well. And so that's a great question, and the answer is yes. We do what we do. There's a lot of people who do things in support of Israel, but and again, I don't want to name names. I don't want to, because I'll miss some, not because I wouldn't call them out for it, but there are some that do what they're do as almost like a bait and switch. It's we're going to do this to be nice, but we're going to need you to say this prayer. We're going to need you to do that. And again, it's part of what I didn't gloss over, but it's part of what I tried to let you know that we do when we talk about the Crusades, when we talk about the Spanish Inquisition, Martin Luther, all those kind of things, that our history with the Jewish people is that we've either tried to convert them or kill them. And to be honest, neither one, as a Christian in reading the New Testament script, neither one are even what the New Testament scriptures are about. And so Romans 11, if you ever get a chance, Paul talks about it to the Jewish people or to the Christian people, and talks about salvation that comes to the Gentiles and salvation of the Jews, and how God is working everybody through His mercies and through His grace. And it's an incredible picture. Paul actually uses the word, it's a mystery. And so we have a lot of people in the Christian community who think they've got it all figured out, who don't know what they don't know sometimes, and that feel like if we're not going out and getting everyone that we can save, that somehow we're missing the point. And so from an organizational standpoint, that's not what we do, but we spend time with that. In a presentation, it's hit on, it's a lot of those conversations after the fact. Well, what about this? What about these other things? And a lot of things that the Christian people don't know their Bible like the Jewish people know their Bible. We don't. And so we're able to take them through some scriptures. Well, have you thought about this? Have you thought about this? And be able to diffuse some of that kind of thinking. And also to be able to talk to them about our history and why that's not only wrong, it's not only incorrect, from a theological standpoint. It's incorrect and wrong from just a human standpoint. This is not helpful in any way. And so, so we're able to talk to them about that. You don't win everybody. We don't win everyone, but it is part of our message. It's hard to do and condense in a presentation that, again, I went through in 25 minutes, that I've culled down to 40 minutes, that one of our guys just did in Minnesota for an hour and 20 minutes. I don't know how you sit there that long and listen to, I don't want to hear myself speak for an hour and 20 minutes. So nobody else would either. It's the conversations afterwards. We're able to touch on those things. And it's a brilliant question. And it's one of the things that, we have to combat. It's not the only thing we have to combat, but it's one of the things that we have to combat. And I'll be honest with you, the things that probably we combat more than that are the quote unquote social justice mindset of youngers, millennials, and those kind of things, that Israel's the apartheid state and whatever, because they're, I hate to say it, but a lot of, again, we're biblically illiterate a lot of times. And so they don't even bring that up. But I do have pastors who do bring that. What about the salvation of the Jews? What about, and of course, again, historically, biblically, everything, you can debunk it, but we try our best not just to debunk, you're wrong, and move on. We do try to take them through some of the scriptures and say, okay, have you thought about this? Have you looked at this? And we're able to do that. Our Israel Collective group does a lot of that too, be able to talk to believers on that and deal with millennials and things. But it's a great question. So yeah, we do address it. It depends who we're talking to. Every conversation has the same answer. Sometimes the path to get to that answer is a little different depending on who we talk to and the response. So yeah, that's a great question. And I just from a standpoint, just from a human standpoint, I hate that people have to deal with those kind of things. And so, yeah,
Yeah, so let's see
Pastor Hagee,
oh.
Pastor Hagee's best friend was Rabbi Scheinberg, who just passed away a couple of months ago. And they were best friends, and they have modeled such an incredible relationship. Matter of fact, we have a fellowship that's going on right now between a pastor and a rabbi who have become friends. And we're taking 18 pastor and rabbi groups and walking them through and just, what is your relationship like? How do you work together? And I think at the end of next year, we're going to take them to Israel together. So what an incredible way to be able to break down some of that barrier that shouldn't be there.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Stephen, did you have another question?
Well, Bob, I was thinking that certainly the Jewish community needs to do most of the heavy lifting as it relates to combating the BDS movement or those people who see Israel as an apartheid state. But I think that many of the biblical verses that you cite may not be as persuasive in the 21st century when you're dealing with people who are just reading the headlines. So what can we do, or what can you do to confront people who are Bible illiterate and choose that as their their source of income, not income, I apologize. The source of information is what they read on social media.
It's not a minority that gets their news from social media. A few years ago on the Comedy Network, Comedy Channel, where the Daily Show came out, and it was several people back, and I think there began to be a shift of younger people who began to see that as news. I mean, it was a comedy, had some funny things in it. It was very, very funny, but they began to see that as news, and now even more. I mean, you've done the studies, but over the years, people's attention spans and all that, and news is done by social media and TikTok and whatever. And so, again, it depends who we're talking to. My purpose of giving that today was to be able to give you an overview of what we would speak of our message, that you should be able to come out of it not knowing if I'm Democrat, Republican, Independent, whatever, put it in your name. It should be something Now, again, there's some New Testament scriptures. There should be some that you could give to a Jewish audience or a Christian audience, or even part of it an atheist audience. It doesn't matter. But however, we realize that most people are getting their news from snippets and things like that. So that is where some of our younger demographic comes in, our younger employees and staff comes in. CUFI on Campus does an incredible job of, they've started a huge TikTok campaign, something I don't use. I think it's silly, but a lot of people use it. And so they started a TikTok campaign where they'll do things, and I'll pull it up every once in a while. Instagram messaging. Our Israel Collective deals mainly with social media influencers, as well as millennials in general. They'll take football players, sports players. They take people from the arts, from music industry, secular and Christian. They will take people who have thousands and thousands of followers on Instagram, on Twitter, on TikTok, on whatever the other ones are. Facebook's kind of more my generation, I guess. And so they'll take the people who have the influencers, and they take them to Israel because of what you said, because of I can give the everything I said was true. Sometimes it doesn't resonate, which is why the conversations are more important, which are why trying to get the those that do influence other people to understand, and they will take people to Israel. Our Israel Collective will do about 6 to 8 trips a year. They're just starting back, I think, in November, and taking some people, and they'll take people from all over, people who will actively say, I am more pro-Palestinian than I am pro-Israel. And they'll take them to Israel and let Israel speak for itself. And the amazing results of them coming back, and one tweet from them, one picture of the Sea of Galilee from them, reaches thousands and thousands of people, and does it in such a way to where people are amazed by it, and people are changed by it. That's unbelievable to people of my generation. But those that are 25 years, 30 years, whatever, younger than I am, are dramatically changed by that one picture from that one influencer. And so what you said is correct. It depends on the audience. And one thing that we have done is really recognize that they're not all my audience. I can't speak to everyone. I mean, I can speak, but these other groups, Israel Collective, CUFI on Campus, things like that, are able to reach people that I'm not able to reach. And they do it in 30-second snippets as opposed to a 45-minute presentation. It's an amazing thing. So I agree that demographic's out there, and we're making headways. We're making headway with it. All that helps us to know we're on the right track with that. So that's good.
I'll just let one last chance for final questions. If not, we're getting close to time, and I want to make sure we have time to thank you. Any other questions from anyone that's on the call? Okay, well then I will.
We got a hand. We got a hand raised.
Okay, go
Hi,
ahead.
Bob.
Okay, all right, go ahead.
Yeah. Hi, Bob. My name's Avi. I just wanted to thank you and all the work that you all do to support Israel. My sister lives in Israel. She's been there for 60 years. It's conflicted. She's conflicted there because her son just went into the Air Force. And by the way, I've been to CUFI events at Bishop Rodriguez's church here. And they're incredible events. I mean, it just feels so good to be embraced by the Hispanic community and see their support for Israel. But digging a little deeper in the response that you get from kids, our kids in the Jewish community are conflicted. We want them to share the same passion for Israel that you share and we share. But they see things going on that are very difficult for them to resolve. And whether certainly Israel's not an apartheid state, but they have their own issues dealing with minorities.
Sure.
People who are poor, and they've got a long way to go to increase the justice in their own society. And they're working on it. But the treatment of Arabs and Palestinians in Israel is a question that Jews raise all the time. And not just here, but in Israel. They're trying to balance their own morality in dealing with people who are not the same as they are. But talk about the occupation for a second. The question isn't whether Israel should secure itself by being in the West Bank. Certainly Area C, controlling the area near Jerusalem, is essential. But surely you get questions raised by young people about how the presence of Israel in the West Bank relates to how it's treating the people that are living there. And are you getting any pushback from your young people about the morality of this whole business? Not just the need to support Israel, but this is messy business. It's not clean. And we're getting a lot of pushback from our young people and from our adults about should there be a reckoning with peace and what that looks like. So I'm just wondering how you answer those questions in more detail when they arise. Am I being clear?
Sure. Yeah, no, perfectly. And the answer is yes, I do get those questions. When Hamas was sending over rocket after rocket after rocket back in, when was it, May of this year, a young lady who is not a teenager, she is probably closer to 40, but just it's a different generation. She may be in her 30s, maybe younger 30s. But she wrote me on Facebook Messenger, tell me why this matters. Tell me what's going on. So we wrote, and she had a different philosophy than I do. And is I love this young lady. She's just a precious young lady and beautiful kids, and just a completely different philosophy. And sometimes the easy answer is that people don't know what they don't know. Another easy way to respond to that is there's nothing that's ever cut and dry, black and white. There's nothing ever. It's like it always is this and it always is this. There's always the gray. There's always the nuances. That general statements don't usually work. That there's always instances where things happen. And so part of my work. I hope you understand what I'm saying. Part of my work is to understand a little more than maybe the average person understands. And the reason is to have the answers to those questions when they come, because they do. You mentioned, and it's not just young people, it's even older generations. The idea, and it's the social justice mindset that has not just been, hey, we need to treat all people well. But somehow there has been an understanding that those, again, overgeneralization, those who are rich are evil, those who are poor are good, those who are strong are the oppressors, and those who are weak are the victims. And when Israel is able to come out of having, and the numbers vary, but 4,000, we'll just use 4,000 plus rockets that come over in Israel, and they're able to shoot them out of the air. And the casualties in Israel are so every life matters, but I mean, the casualties in Israel are so small compared to the number of rockets that come over. You understand what I'm saying? And then there were casualties in Gaza, which was the majority of them were the fighters, but then there's always casualties of war. There's always collateral damage. There's always that kind of thing. And when the statement comes of, well, look, Israel must be the aggressor because they only lost this number, X, and then these other people they were fighting lost X times 2 or 3 or 4, Israel must be the aggressor. It's people, like Stephen said, people getting their headlines, people getting their news from snippets. They only read the headlines. They don't delve into the area. That's a lot of what we deal with. So it's information. But
if I could
yeah,
pull that a little narrow, can I continue for a minute, Deb, or am I too late?
I'll give it another minute, and then, yeah, we'll give it, and then we may need
And I'll
to
be
take
very
this
quick.
offline.
Okay.
Okay, but yeah, we'll give it
Yeah.
another minute.
So there's two threads that just in the past few weeks have emerged in the Jewish community. One is the growing concern that the way the conditions are on the ground right now in the West Bank in particular, that Israel is starting to question the long term, if it continues the way it is now. Israel's concern is about the morality of the situation and how that's going to impact on future generations in Israel. So the whole question of morality
Of their
of
of
keeping
their,
people, controlling of people.
yeah, I understand.
They're-
I got
And
you.
then the other question is to respond to that. The trend now that seems to be surfacing is forget two states for now, if that could ever happen. But the question now is if Israel revisited the way in which it's occupying in Palestine, or its presence in Palestine, I'll take the word occupy off, its presence, and improve the conditions on the ground, that it might lead to a reduction in violence in the future. So there's an effort going on by the current administration to make conditions more palatable to people that are living in the West Bank, improve their ability to self-govern, the conditions in which they live so they can visit family. If they can improve the conditions there, I'm just wondering if you guys ever talk about that kind of.
Yeah, we do. And I'll try to be very, very quick. And one of the things, of course, I hate to reduce anything to sound bites. I really do. But
Right.
but one of the things is truly when you talk about conditions that are there and those kind of things and making this self-government governing, a lot of that is really it's the onus of the Palestinian Authority. It's in their hands, a lot of what do we do, and when you talk about how can you allow a people to be able to do anything that they want in a certain area when all they want to do is toss rockets on, or what do they want to do that? So that's the story in Gaza. Palestinian Authority is much the same way. It's how can they self-govern? I would say that's in the hands of the Palestinian Authority. I would say that's in the hands of Abbas. It's in their hands. And one of the things, again, not to reduce it to a soundbite, but when the Palestinian Authority love their own children more than they hate the Jews, there will be a change. And when infrastructure money goes to support tunnels and terrorists and other things, when any indoctrination of their own people ceases to be about we need to kill the Jews, when the wording of from the river to the sea ceases to be the mantra of those that are in Palestinian Authority, Hamas, and wherever else. And it still is, even though, whatever. When that ceases to happen, then the roadmap is a little easier for a peaceful solution, whether, however they handle the geopolitical lines and all that kind of stuff. But it's interesting. And I wrote down what you said, because I'm going to take it back, because it's all of this is part of our conversation. We're fat and happy over here in the United States. We're not there. It's not the 51st state of the United States. They're a sovereign nation and all that. So how can we be there to support the people? How can we act and react based on the realities of the ground, not just what we think needs to be taught or whatever? So those are brilliant questions. I wrote them down here on a piece of paper. That's the talk, and it'll be part of our discussion.
I'd be happy
really
to
will.
continue that
Thank-
conversation at any time, Bob, because Israel inside, people there are struggling with the same questions. Thanks.
Sure.
Seth, for-
Thank you.
Deborah, if you could put my email address and make sure everyone gets it, any question. And again, the answer may be, I may not write back immediately with a full page response, but
It's okay.
we'll dialogue. We'll get it.
Great.
It'll be good.
Would
Yeah.
love to do it. Thank you.
I would love
very
that.
much.
Yeah.
So I'm going to close. I'll share everyone on the call happens to, I can get Bob's contact to all of you. First, I just want to thank you again, Bob, for joining us today and for giving us some fuller understanding of CUFI and your work. Some of us already knew, and for the rest of us, I also want to thank Stephen for being our moderator today. And one final, our next Lunch and Learn will be on November the 12th, Friday, November the 12th. Our guest will be attorney Ross Margulies, and he will be sharing with us information about the resettlement process for some of the Afghan refugees coming to our city and our state. And so we hope you'll join us again for the Lunch and Learn at noon on November 12th. Thank you all, and we will continue this conversation. Bob, thank you. I will make sure you and Avi are in connection, and that anyone else who wants to connect you directly can do so. So thank you all, and everyone enjoy
Thank
your
you,
weekend.
Bob.